Hi everyone, Plastic EP here from Melbourne, Australia. Coming in, we got Liverpool Dave, Vinyl LP. He's wearing his Liverpool shirt. How are you today, Dave?
I'm good. Liverpool shirt, because Liverpool are champions, as we said last time. And we had another good victory at the weekend, 2-0. So happy days. Good to be a Liverpool fan.
Happy days are here again now. We'll tell everybody we've got a big interview happening with Angie McCartney.
Yeah.
Paul's stepmother, that's going to happen shortly. And today, it's been a big event. Ringo Starr's birthday. We'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, because yesterday, Ringo was 80. And it's amazing. I was looking just before. There was an article in one of the national newspapers celebrating his birthday. When you go down to the comments, there's still people saying, oh, he was just lucky. They're even repeating the old myth that John Lennon said that he wasn't even the best drummer in the Beatles. That was a joke from the 1980s from a British comedian. Ringo was, well, the title of my last book, he was the fourth Beatle. Ringo was a fantastic drummer, rated by the top drummers of the last few decades. So congratulations, peace and love, as we say, to Ringo. Happy 80th. I hope I look that good at 80. I really do. So, yeah, great guy. Looking good as well.
Peace and love to him now. The day John met Paul. Let's go through it.
Yeah, of course, Monday was the 6th of July. And on the 6th of July, 1957, that is the birth of the Beatles. That's when John Lennon met Paul McCartney for the very first time. And you know what? It only happened to one of the strangest coincidences. Now, there's a lot of coincidences all the way through the Beatles story, but this is the biggest one. So when John went to live with his Aunt Mimi in Woolton, he was age 5. The first lad that he met, who he became friends with, was Ivan Vaughan. Now, Ivan lived in the house just behind John's. He introduced him to another couple of friends, Nigel Wally and Pete Shotton. So they were the little gang of 4. Ivan was at Dovedale School with John, but in the year behind him. Now, as we know, our good friend Michael Hill was at Dovedale with John. He got his fantastic book, John Lennon, the Boy Who Became a Legend. Michael went through Dovedale with John and then went to Quarry Bank with John. That didn't happen with Ivan. And that's all because of Ivan's parents. Because John, he was a bit of a pain, being mild. The parents called him that Lennon. We don't really want you hanging around with that Lennon. So because John could be a distraction, Ivan's parents said, no, you're not going to Quarry Bank where John Lennon is. We're going to send you to another school. So they sent him all the way into Liverpool city centre to a school called the Liverpool Institute. A few years after joining there, he ends up in a class with the lad born on exactly the same day as him, 18th of June, 1942, who of course was Paul McCartney. So Ivan, shared birthday, same class, they become friends. It's Ivan who says to Paul, my friend John's got this skiffle group, the Quarrymen. Do you want to come and see them play? If it hadn't been for Ivan Vaughan, John and Paul would not have got together.
And his parents for sending him there.
Absolutely. So, and for John being a pain in the backside, for being so bad that they sent Ivan to another school. So Ivan brings Paul to meet John at St. Peter's Church, 6th of July, 1957. Now, this was an annual event in Woolton. Everybody in the village took part. They did this parade, went around the village, and they had like a marching band at the front. They have wagons dressed up with bunting and all kinds of stuff. The brownies, the guides. And at the very back was a wagon with the Quarrymen on it. So they parade all the way around the village, get back to the church. They walk then through the churchyard to the field at the back. And there, the Quarrymen perform. Now, of course, this was skiffle, which we've talked about before. John's at the front with his guitar, and they've got the Pete on washboard, Rod on banjo, Len on his T-chest bass, Colin on drums, and then John and Eric on guitars. But of course, John and Eric played their guitars like banjos, because that's how John was taught by his mum. So in the audience, there's Paul McCartney, and he's watching, and he thinks, John's got good charisma. He's singing, he looks good, but he can't work out what the hell he's playing because he's watching his hands. Now, guitarists watch other guitarists to try and see what chords they're playing. So Paul's looking at John and going, that doesn't make sense. What the hell is he playing? So he's curious. So the Quarrymen do their performance. All goes well. And that's the end of their little show. So then they're due to appear again in the evening over at the church hall. So just across the road from the church, the stage is set up and there's going to be a band playing. But the Quarrymen are going to be playing as well. Now, the only reason they were playing was because all the lads went to St. Peter's Church. They'd gone there to Sunday school. They'd gone through the youth club. John had been in the Scouts for a short time. John had even been in the choir. Now, can you imagine John Lennon in a choir robe singing in church? How angelic. No.
And what, they kicked him out?
Yeah, because his best mate, Pete Shotton, would giggle and laugh at anything John said. John could keep a straight face, but Pete would giggle. So they'd be in the middle of a hymn, and John would start changing the words. So, of course, he'd be doing that, keeping a straight face. Pete would be giggling and causing chaos. So in the end, the choir master had enough and he threw them out. So they were out the choir. But the reason they were playing that day was because they were just the lads from the youth club. Pete Shotton's mum was on the organising committee and said, no, give the lads something to do. So that's why they were playing. So in the evening, we're over in the hall at St. Peter's. John's there with the rest of the lads. Ivan brings Paul and introduces him to John. This then becomes the most important 20 minutes ever. So they start talking. Because first thing Paul wants to know is from John, what the hell were you playing? So John explains about playing banjo chords. So the next thing that happens is John gives Paul his guitar. So the first thing Paul wants to do is tune it properly. By tuning his guitar, he's now more qualified than any musician in the Quarrymen, because nobody knew how to play guitar properly. So Paul tunes the guitar, but, and this is it, I learned this from a guy called Ian James, who I interviewed for my second book, The Fab 104. He taught Paul to play. Ian's guitar was right-handed. Paul didn't know you could get a left-handed guitar. So he learned to play Ian's guitar upside down. So you're in the hall. Imagine you're John Lennon, right? You can't play the guitar, apart from a few banjo chords. Here comes this lad, takes your guitar, tunes it, and then does the most amazing thing. He flips it upside down. You think, what the hell's going on here? And then Paul starts playing John's guitar upside down. And he starts with that little riff from 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran. And so he's playing it. He can sing. And he knows all the words. That's why John was so impressed with him. And he does a little bit of Long Tall Sally. Now again, this comes back to Michael Hill's book. Now the importance of Long Tall Sally to the Beatles. That's the song that Michael introduced to John Lennon. Without knowing it, Paul loved Long Tall Sally as well. And in his audition for John, he does a little bit of Long Tall Sally. So John's amazed with this lad. And they chat for about 20 minutes. And then off Paul goes and he goes home. John's got a big decision then. Do I want somebody in my group who can play the guitar properly, is much better than me or anybody else, but will make the group better? Or do I stay the kingpin as the best? For John, as we know, all that mattered to him was the music. That's why he never wanted John Lennon and the Beatles or something like that. He wanted to be a group. So the ego wasn't there. He was always going to be the leader. But he thought, if I get Paul in the group, I can do better music. I can do rock and roll, which is what John wanted to do. He wanted to look like Elvis. He wants to play rock and roll. Paul was the guy who could help him do that.
Yeah.
And so a couple of weeks later, John and Pete Shotton have been talking, saying, yeah, let's let him in the group. It's actually Pete Shotton bumped into Paul because Paul had been going to Ivan's house. And he said, oh, Paul, glad I've seen you. John and I were talking. Do you want to join the group? And Paul says, yeah, okay. And that's it. So that meeting, which only happened because of Ivan Vaughan, brings Paul and John together. And then when Pete Shotton bumps into Paul, he asks him to join. Paul says, okay. All that happens. That is the start of the Beatles. That's where it begins. That's why that date is so important. 6th of July, 1957, because that's when everything starts.
Amazing. What's the next topic now? Let's keep it moving.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about Ringo.
Yeah,
for his 80th birthday yesterday.
Yep.
And it's amazing that some people, I say, still don't give him a lot of credit for what he did, which is ridiculous. And that's sort of why with my last book, Finding the Fourth Beatle, it was all about this thing, because John and Paul together. Then, of course, Paul invites George in. So by the end of 1957, John, Paul, and George are together. And Neil Aspinall always said the Beatles was about John, Paul, George, and a drummer. So I found this, 23 drummers in the long career. The three main ones are Colin Hanton, who did from the end of 56 to the beginning of 59. Pete Best from August 60 to August 62, and then Ringo, of course. People still think that Ringo is just a lucky guy. Now, as we know, he wasn't the first drummer to be asked, but it would not have worked in the same way with any other drummer at all. He was the perfect one. And one of the reasons, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat this morning.
Go for it. Don't worry. Take your time. Amazing what we're talking about Ringo.
So the way I look at it is, too many people want to write off Pete Best and say he was a rubbish drummer, and that's nonsense, because it doesn't take you 2 years to work that out. And we had that good discussion the other week, didn't we?
Yeah,
about how good he was. But they were about to become a completely different group. The Beatles, the great band that Pete was part of, conquered Liverpool, conquered Hamburg, got Brian Epstein as manager, got the record deal with George Martin. They were a fantastic rock and roll and R&B covers band, mainly. That was about to change, because once they signed the record contract, they were going to become a pop group that would be making records, and it's a different band. So in the Finding the Fourth Beatle book, I say the Beatles are dead, long live the Fab Four. I look at them as two separate bands. When you do that, you can appreciate Pete for everything he did, and that's one phase of the group. Once Ringo joins, it's a different group, and they go on to the next level. And this sort of goes back to John inviting Paul into the group. The Quarrymen were doing fine, but they couldn't go any further. To make that step up, they needed somebody better, and that's where Paul comes in. He takes them up a notch, but they need a lead guitarist. Paul couldn't do that, so they went out and they get George. They go up another notch. They worked hard, get Stewart as bass player, and he does a good job, but they need to move it up a gear. Stewart quits, Paul going on to bass. They then break everything. It's been just brilliant. Hamburg, Liverpool gets them to that point. But now the band's going to change again, and they've got to make another change. And Ringo was the guy who could then take them up that next notch and become a recording band. And his contribution is really, I think, been underrated. Because it's easy, people say, well, no, you couldn't take John, Paul and George out of the Beatles because you wouldn't have the Beatles. But you could replace Ringo with anybody.
No, you can't. And what happens is with every band, the dynamics change. That's what they don't understand. One drummer plays one way, another one plays another. What happens is Ringo played how the song was meant to be. It was tailor-made. Ringo made each Beatles song tailor-made as the Beatles. That's what it is.
Exactly right. And it's like you come back to football again.
Yep. Liverpool.
I'm going to put an analogy to football all the time. Liverpool, when you look at our team, we've blown away the opposition. Champions of Europe, champions of the world, Premier League champions. Now, we've got a number of world-class players, but not every single player in our team is world-class in their position. But at our strongest team, you can't beat it. That's why we're 25 points clear at the top of the league. And that's what you get with a group. You don't always have to be the best. If you look at Liverpool, the best drummer in Liverpool was Johnny Hutchinson. Best bass player was probably Johnny Gustafsson. Best lead guitar player was Colin Manley. Rhythm guitar, John was up there, but probably Brian Griffiths and a couple of others. So you wouldn't say any of the Fab Four were the best technically in Liverpool at their instrument, but you stick them together as two of the best singers ever, two of the best songwriters that ever existed, and a group of four people who understood each other on that level. You can't beat it. And that's what they had, and that's what Ringo brought in. He had an intuition that made it work perfectly with Paul, because obviously bass and drums have to work together. But he had this instinct of knowing exactly what the right rhythm was, the right fill was, at the right time. And again, I was watching an interview with him the other day for Rolling Stone. Brilliant interview. And it's one of the things I was trying to find out for finding the fourth Beatle was, people always said Ringo could play the song. What does that mean? And I interviewed so many drummers. And what it came down to was, when Ringo would play a song and he'd think, I'm going to do a fill at this point, he'd do it. Now, normally, like a session drummer, you do exactly that fill, same places through the song every time you did it. Not for Ringo. I spoke to drummers from Beatles tribute bands, because of course they had to learn the parts that Ringo did. And he said, he's a nightmare. So because you go into the first fill from a verse into a chorus, or coming out of the chorus, and you think you've got it. But that same place later in the song, Ringo's doing something different. Because by then he thinks it needs something different to what he'd just done. And every take he would do, it would be slightly different. And you cannot teach that. It's something intuitive about the way Ringo plays drums. He changed how things happened. One of the key things, of course, was that he was naturally left-handed and played a right-handed kit. So the way you go round the kit is different. So it's a split second because he'd lead with his left hand, which is natural. So the sound was different. And that's why if you see when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they did this lovely film with some of the top drummers around. Every single one of them says Ringo was the king of cool, the king of swing. We wanted to play like him. Now, if the top drummers in the world are saying that, then that's good enough for me. And
they are saying that. Everybody says it. You go on the net, they're doing films. They're saying how great Ringo is. I don't know if you've seen that one where they got all the drummers playing on a kit that looks like Ringo's and they all hop on. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And that's the one. So you cannot take Ringo out of the Fab Four and it'd be the same. And I recommend this to everybody, right? Go and listen to all the Beatles albums chronologically, but listen for the drumming. And I hadn't done that before until I started work on that book. And you start hearing things that you'd never come across.
And if you want the experience, go and listen to Rain. He reckons what he played on that song, he could never do it again, and that's technically his greatest song.
Absolutely superb. Even if you go for something popular like Strawberry Fields Forever, just listen to the drumming on that. It's phenomenal. Exactly right at every stage of the song. So that's why the book was called Finding the Fourth Beatle, because he was the last part in the jigsaw that took them up to that next level. And it wouldn't have worked with any other drummer. And he was so much part of the group. He contributed to the songs. He was just the right person for it. So he now looks fantastic at 80. He's still playing drums. He's still touring. And he is still the fourth Beatle. So peace and love to Ringo. Absolutely fantastic, man. Great
David
drummer.
Bedford, let me tell you, another exciting episode from the Bedford Report. And we're going to see you again soon. And thank you so much. Take us out and say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. Always good to see you. Take care. Thank you, Plastic EP, Vinyl LP.
See you again.
Signing off.
Bye.